I want to welcome to the show now one of my oldest friends in the pro-life movement from Human Life International, Brian Clowes. Hello, Brian.
Thank you, Mark. It's good to be here.
Brian, we're going to talk about a subject here, and that's violence in the abortion industry. And this is something that you and I have talked about for years. But let's make sure people understand the importance of this issue. Anytime you go out, let's say you go to a new church and you're in Sunday school or you're just talking to people there and you mention the pro-life issue. Inevitably, the reason that they'll give for the reason that they don't get involved or that they don't want to hear about it is because of their perceived perception that the pro-life movement is violent. Clearly, the media in this country and the abortion industry has done a fantastic marketing job of painting us with that. The reality is quite different than that, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is. When you talk to people, try to get them involved in the pro-life movement, it's not so much that the pro-life movement is violent. They don't want to be seen as violent.
Right.
And through all the research I've done over the last 12 or 15 years, I've accumulated mounds of information, more than 4,000 newspaper articles on the violence done by the pro-abortion people. And this is never mentioned by the media because the media admits that it's pro-choice. The Newspaper Guild of America has actually gone on record as saying we support a woman's right to choose. So they're not impartial at all.
Right. And the point here is, though, that not that even if there are acts of violence, and there have admittedly been acts of violence committed by people who claim to be pro-life, even if that occurs, you can't say then that that's neutralized by the fact that these other people do more. My argument is no one ever talks about the more that these people do, and it's exponentially greater. I mean, the research that we've done, which a lot of it we turned over to you, we've proven that. I mean, I just give one thing that we found, and I'm sure you've seen this as well. When people have this perception that there have been thousands of abortionists shot and killed by pro-lifers, in reality, there's been 3. The other perception is that there's all this just random acts and acts of violence carried out at abortion clinics because the media reports on what the National Abortion Federation and NARAL and Planned Parenthood and all those report. We found in a report that National Abortion Federation did, they listed a certain number of thousands of acts of violence. When you looked at it broken down, they counted a nun praying on the sidewalk in front of an abortion clinic as an act of violence.
That's right. You go to their website right now at prochoice.org, that you look at the violence and disruption reports. They have 120,000 incidents of violence listed. 87% of that is picketing or praying outside abortion clinics.
Right. So they consider that an act of violence.
They do.
And it is. But, you know, the most amazing thing here to me is that when violence is clearly proven against the pro-abortion side, they come out and defend the violators, not the victims.
That's right. That's right. A few years ago down in Arizona, Bruce Stair just butchered Sharon Hampton and walked away and let her bleed to death. The National Organization for Women, ACLU, all of them lined up on the side of the abortionist and said this is some kind of plot to try to shut him down. They wanted no charges brought whatsoever.
And he was eventually convicted.
He was, yeah, of murder.
And, you know, I'm thinking, too, also in Arizona of the situation with Brian Finkel, who had raped, we have no idea how many, and sexually assaulted, no idea how many of his patients, but over 100 women came forward. 100 women came forward. Now, the abortion industry's argument always is we're there to support women. Yeah. 100 women come forward and say, this man sexually assaulted or raped us while we were in abortion clinics. They came out and defended Brian Finkel and said these women were lying.
NOW said that flat out. Most of these women are lying.
Right. And they said this is part of a conspiracy to get poor hapless Dr. Finkel. Well, you got to believe then that 100 women who were either pro-choice enough to work in an abortion clinic, because many of these were employees, or have abortions, this 100 pro-choice women conspire with the Phoenix Police Department, the grand jury, the sheriff's department, and an unnamed pro-life organization to go after this guy. That's what you have to believe that the National Organization for Women was not lying.
It sounds plausible to me if you're living in a dream world.
If you're living in some kind of, fantasy. Also, when you look at the issues of violence from an employment standpoint, they would have you believe that when you go to work at an abortion clinic every morning, you have to dodge a hail of bullets just to get from your car to the front door. The reality is it's one of the safer professions if you look at the statistics put out by the
Department of Justice.
Department of Justice. Look how many convenience store employees get killed. I mean,
you look at the Department of Justice statistics. You look at Brian Finkel, a guy you mentioned a little while ago. He would pose for the cameras with a Glock pistol and a bulletproof vest. And he would tell them that he was under, tremendous threat all the time. Warren Hearn has said that a third of all abortion mills have been bombed. But if you look at the Department of Justice statistics, there have been 7 times as many hairdressers killed as abortionists in the past, during the time that the violence happened, 1993 to 1998.
Right. Yeah, I know. And we did the same kind of numbers. More farmers are killed, far more lawyers are killed on the job than abortionists. Far more dentists are killed on the job than
Truck drivers.
Yeah. You find some strange professions that have actually a high number of them get killed on the job. Abortionists are so far down the list, they don't even make like the top 100 thing that's put out by the FBI, the list of most dangerous jobs. Abortion clinic worker is not even on that list.
That's right. Yeah.
It's so far down the line. Now, you guys have created a website that we want to make sure people are aware of. Tell us about that website and what you've got on it.
Well, the 10 or 12 years of research we've done, we've accumulated all of this documented information of more than 7,000 incidents of actual violence done by the pro-abortion people. We're talking about cannibalism, rape, murder, kidnapping, the really serious stuff. And some of these people who've done really dumb things, like Alan Zarkin, he thought he did such good work. He's an abortionist in New York City. He thought he did such good work, he actually carved his initials on one poor woman's uterus. Mm-hmm. So I called him Zorro from then on. It's at abortionviolence.com. And you go there, you have about a 45-page summary of all the violence, and then you can go to state documentation. All of this is completely documented.
It's, one of the things that really jumped out at me when we were doing our initial research on this, and I think we turned some of this over to you. More abortionists have been killed since 1973 by other abortionists than have been killed by the pro-life movement.
That's right. That was first exposed in the Abortion Profiteer series by Chicago Sun-Times back in 1978. They mentioned 3 abortionists at that time, and since then there have been several others documented on the abortion violence website. So
there was more by 1978, 5 years after Roe, than there have been so-called killed by the pro-life movement up to this date.
That's true. That's true.
It's pretty astonishing, and the question becomes, why doesn't the media point this out? And one of the things that bothers me is I've been in situations where I point out to people that I work full-time in pro-life, and I'm sure you've been in this situation, and they'll say, well, I'm all for you guys, and I believe you're right, but I just can't go along with you guys shooting these abortionists and all this. I wonder how many people, if you went up and said to them, I belong to the Teamsters Union, or I belong to the United Auto Workers, would say, well, I'm all for labor unions, but I don't believe in all the violence. The reality is, if you look back at the history of socio-political movements in this country, the pro-life movement is by far the most peaceful socio-political movement of its size and its tenure by an exponential factor than any other one in the world. And again, I'm not picking on labor unions, but just look at that. There have been single instances of labor union violence in which more people were killed, more property damage was done, more people were injured, single instances, than in the whole 33-year history of the pro-life movement.
That's also documented on abortionviolence.com website. There's something called the National Institute for Labor Relations Research, which shows more than 300 murders committed by union thugs in the last 20 years. We never hear anything about that.
Right. But again, and you can see the media's hand in this thing, and I'll give you a couple of examples of this. But one, we went for many, many years there, and it's kind of dying away a little bit now. But there was not a single story published by the national media in this country. It didn't matter what the subject was. If it was related to abortion that didn't mention violence, at the end they will say something like, so far 2 abortion clinic workers have been killed in the last 18 months working at abortion clinics. I don't care what the subject was. There was never a an abortion-related article written that didn't include that. And one of the issues that I point out here is, we talked about it on last month's show, there was a situation down in Florida. An abortionist is shot and killed at a Pensacola abortion clinic.
Yeah.
This is national news. It's international news. You have newspapers and media people from all over the world.
Oh, yeah.
It's the lead story on the evening news for days and days and days. We have congressional hearings about this. Janet Reno puts federal marshals at every abortion clinic in the country, gives them special protection. Never does that for convenience stores. When a convenience store employee is killed, they don't put federal marshals at all the convenience stores because the abortionist counts more. But the interesting thing about this particular incident in Florida was, just a couple of weeks later, there was a 28-year-old mother of two killed at that same abortion clinic by the abortionist. No one ever heard of it. A woman named Pamela Colson. And there's been a lot of women killed at the abortion clinics, but I just use this one as an example because it was the same abortion clinic within a 2-week period of time. An abortionist gets killed, a woman gets killed. The abortionist gets all of the press, the woman is completely forgotten. And my question to you is, Brian, very simple. Why does that abortionist count more than that woman?
It's because of the bias of the media. And back in 1988, Stanley Rothman and John Lichter did a study. They interviewed members of the media and asked them what their orientation was on this issue. 97% of newspaper reporters said they were pro-choice. 1% said they were pro-life.
Right.
97%. And so the bias always seeps through on this.
Absolutely.
There's another thing. We hear all the time about abortion mills being burned, but in the time since Roe v. Wade, 1973, for every abortion mill that's been burned, there have been 18 churches burned down. And what do you hear about more?
Right.
They don't care about religion, they care about abortion.
Right.
And that's what this is all about.
We're just about out of time, but I want to go back to this Brian Finkel thing because it makes a point that I think is very relevant here. Brian Finkel, and we had been providing information to the people in Arizona about what we had found out about him. I wrote about him in my book, Line 5, about the women he'd raped and sexually abused. This gets totally whitewashed by the media. What would have happened, Brian, had this been a pro-lifer who was accused of raping 100 women or sexually assaulting 100 women? I guarantee you it wouldn't have gotten whitewashed.
Oh, my gosh, no.
Hey, Brian, one more time. We're about out of time. Give us the website again and tell people where they can go to get this information.
Abortionviolence.com. This is a printout of the website here, single space. There's a lot of information there, more than 800 pages, all of it completely documented. So the next time somebody says the pro-life movement is violent, you can say to a certain extent a few nutcases were, but that is not the typical pro-lifer.
Right.
The typical pro-choice activist is violent.
Absolutely. They use violence to solve their problem.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brian.